Hi, Bernie.
Hello.
How's it going? So here we both are in Italy, just kind of with a bit of downtime. How's it feeling, both on the Duran tour? Because that's how I know you. And yeah, and but what I'm really excited about, and I still haven't done my research, so it's even more of an opportunity to ask you to speak more about your fantastic podcast, which I know about in theory because I've asked you when I bumped into you, but I haven't yet listened to, which I feel very guilty about. So, but it's an opportunity for you to just tell us even more about it. It's really exciting. I always find it exciting because I know you because you do all the bass tech for John. So I know you do that. But when someone's doing something creative and supporting another creative as well, and then they go and do something else, I always find that intriguing. So where would you like to start? What actually, yeah, let's start there. Why did you decide to do it?
Um, it's I've been talking about doing something like this probably for the last few years. I was going to do it on YouTube, and I was just going to record stories from the road, interview fans that were waiting outside, ask them questions, and then that kind of evolved into, well, I'm going to talk to people, and then the pandemic hit, and it was so I just kind of laid low. I have a partner who does the podcast with me. Her name is Lisa Letterman, and we just kind of brainstormed. And I said, you know what? I'm just gonna um, start calling people and talking to them and interviewing them. And that went on for a few months of me sending her phone calls that I was making and her telling me like, maybe you could work on this, maybe you could work on that. And then we finally bit the bullet and just released one.
Okay, so you sent her the phone calls. How did you do that? How did you
Well,
record them?
in the beginning, I was doing them on Zoom, and I was really unhappy because I didn't know. I'm extremely technically ignorant, and I didn't know what to do. So I was sending them on Zoom, and then I purchased a recorder that recorded to a SIM card that I could upload into GarageBand and do all my editing, and it allowed me to make phone calls, which was great because nobody was leaving the house, you couldn't go anywhere, and I could just make phone calls and record them, and and then those recordings became the first few episodes. Like we released the first one in March of 2021, and the response was amazing to it. Like we were just every time we'd see a listen, we were happy when we got 10 listens. Yeah.
Yeah,
First
I know
time.
exactly how
And
you
then
feel. It
we
is
realized
exciting. When you're doing something that you really
it
love,
is, it
it's
is.
really fun. It's whether it's 10 or 10,000, or it because you know that it's aligned and it's something you're really excited about. It really does feel like that, doesn't it? It's also because it's a new project, but it just really, I totally get that feeling of just excited, regardless of how many it's a number. So you said you'd send the phone calls, and but it had been on your mind for quite a long time. So who have you been interviewing? And I know, yeah. So tell us about the actual podcast.
Well, the podcast is basically I didn't know what the premise was, so I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to interview people that I've met along the way, or people that I find interesting, artists, creators, uh, anyone, anyone that I found interesting, and then I reached out to people who I thought who were like heroes of mine, and they actually responded and said, yeah, we'll
So
do it.
who? When you say heroes
Uh,
of yours, who?
No, I did a bass player named Rudy Sarzo, who's played for Ozzy Osbourne,
Oh,
Quiet Riot. Uh, a guitar player named Ian Moore, who was a hero of mine growing up.
I know Gary Moore. I don't know Ian
Former
Moore.
women's WBC champion boxer Christy Martin. So anybody really, but then I've done a lot of like local musicians. The early phone calls were me just calling friends that were in bands, just trying, because I didn't know what it was like on this side of the mic. I didn't know how to speak, and I didn't know how to make a conversation the way we're talking now. In the beginning, it was very staccato, like "Hello, how are you?" And and I wanted it
Well,
to be
don't rule
more
it out. It
loose.
might happen any minute. Although I've just had an Aperol Spritz, so it probably won't. I'll just ramble on in the silences.
but
Right.
but so yeah, that's where it came from. Just interviewing people I found interesting, and that's how I'm doing it to this day. Like
Yeah.
the
And so
last
when
few
you say
episodes have
you
been.
when you say you interviewed, so how does it go then? Because I think I asked you about that, and you say, "Well, I know it's called Is Breakfast Included," which is a fantastic title. Did you do? How did you come up with the title?
Well, is breakfast included? It's a common term that we use on the road, right?
Right. Yeah.
We check into a hotel, and the first thing we ask is breakfast included? And we had gone through so many names. Lisa and I had gone through so many names, and we were just banging our head. And then it just came to me, and I said, and she loved it, and I loved it. So, you know,
Yeah, it's fantastic. And
I
as you
mean,
said, huh?
I said the podcast is really it's a 50-50 thing. I do the easy part by talking to people and editing, and then I just hand it over. She does all the social media, all the presenting of the podcast. So
So do you still do
like I
it
said, I
via?
always say I do the.
Well, you say that, but it's still a skill, and it's still a certain kind of way it's helpful to have about you to create an easy atmosphere for people to be able to chat. And so you've said you've interviewed a few different people, and do you have like your questions lined up, or do you just literally start chatting and then just see what comes up?
I used to have I would be doing, if I do them by phone, I would have the questions in front of me. I do a lot of them in person too. Um, but more recently, I've just been making a conversation. I'll go in knowing something about the person. But usually what I've found is if there's something I really want to know about someone and I have that question in mind, by the time the interview is over, I never ask that question. It's gone so many different directions that that but
Yeah.
that's what makes it interesting. I think
Yeah,
just
that absolutely, that is what makes it interesting, because I've when I've been doing interviews, I've often written down a list of questions, and then I really don't ask any of them, but I'm still really curious because I mean, I know you get on with your job and you're brilliant at what you do, and you've been doing being a bass tech for so long. So I am still curious, what kind of was the is it always because you've been fascinated by people? Because you're quite kind of understated when you're on the road in a way. And is it because you genuinely, I mean, I find that I'm genuinely curious. So I'm genuinely, or downright nosy, as it turns out. I genuinely want to know about, like, I'll start and I'm like, oh, I just kind of want to keep asking. So are you the same, where you just kind of think, I just kind of want to know your story? Is that how it feels?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a bit of just being curious, or just I like to talk to people. I like to, I just kind of like to talk. I like to find out what's going on in their head. Um, sometimes you strike a nerve with them and they open up completely, and that's when you hit gold. I think when they really open up and
When
start
has that
talking to you.
happened? Can you give an example?
It, Well, like I interviewed a really good friend of mine in several months ago, and I was in Los Angeles, and he lived in Los Angeles, and he was in a band, and they're doing quite well. And I called him and I said, "Do you want to do my podcast?" And I went in there wanting to talk to him about his band, and he just went into his whole life, you know, the struggles he went through to get to where he is now. And he's not super successful in people's eyes, but in his eyes, he's successful. He's doing what he wants to do, and he's making a living, and he's playing music, and he got really deep. And I remember leaving that and just thinking to myself, like, that probably is the way I want them all to go. When someone
Right.
just feels comfortable with you to tell you, like, like, hey, there was times when I didn't want to do it anymore, and there was times when I didn't eat, or and that I kept going, and it was, to me, that's where I like to get like that. And they don't all, sometimes they're just fun. Sometimes people just answer your questions. um
So what? Yeah,
so
that's fascinating. So what would you say about yourself then when you think in that way? What is the bits that like what's your story in that sense that you think, oh, you know what, I maybe I haven't said, I mean, don't know if you're not comfortable, but what is your background? Because I know you from bass playing tech. Like, I don't even know, I'm presuming that most quite a lot of the techs play the instruments as well. Do you know all your way around the instrument? What's your background? Oh, it's frozen. I'm going to pause just until it comes back. Has it come back? Nope. I can hear you. Yeah, let's see how we get on this time.
Good.
It might be a couple of edits. That's all.
Okay.
I think you can manage a couple of edits. So I was just asking, yeah, how did you, what, as far as the bass playing, what is your story? Because I know you with Duran, and so did you play bass to start off with? What is your background?
I didn't play bass. I played bass and guitar. That's it. I played in a band when I was younger and kind of fell into this business, you know, and Duran was probably, after I started doing this, the Duran gig came along, maybe my fourth real gig.
What were you doing before? Which ones did you do?
I started in country music with an artist named Pat Green. I left Pat Green to tour with Pharrell Williams in his band called NERD.
Oh,
And
did you meet Erin then?
I didn't. Aaron had just left when I came on board.
Ah,
Yeah, so I worked for Pharrell for about a year, and I worked for an artist named Josh, who's an Americana artist.
oh,
Acoustic.
something's going on with the
And
reception.
then I got a call. I lived in Dallas, and I got a call and said,
Oh,
"How now, is this Kay?" Yeah.
I'm really hoping it
Yeah,
is,
this
but
internet is so weak.
it doesn't really want to work. I mean, I can hear you.
Hello.
I
Oh,
can
wait,
hear
there you
you,
are.
but
I see you. You can hear me. Let me see.
I don't
See
know.
this.
I'm just walking around this room hoping at some point I'm going to
How's
be able
this?
to. It
Can you
just
hear
doesn't
me?
really want to play ball, does it?
I'm towards the window.
Go towards the. Oh, that's better. Towards the window.
I'm not going towards the
Well, it's a lovely image of you, except it's completely it's just frozen. Oh, that's a shame. I don't know what to suggest here. Just going to put that. Okay, so you worked with country artist and Pharrell and and then one other before you got the Duran gig, right?
Yeah, I was living in Dallas, and I got a call because you guys were coming to Dallas to play a Super Bowl party,
Right.
and I was told you needed a bass tech, and I said okay. I was home, and it just happened to be during a crazy winter storm. Do you remember that?
Um,
Dallas was under like 3
oh,
feet of snow.
I think yeah, but I do remember it. I do remember it because whenever I think of Dallas, I think, oh, it's going to be gorgeous because, from being from the UK, I always get this lovely kind of anticipatory feeling of the heat. And we arrived and it was freezing.
What I remember the most about it is none of you guys had brought coats or anything.
No, we weren't prepared at all. We were expecting it to be nice and sunny. And so that was the first Duran gig. And
Yeah.
and so like three different things. How have those experiences differed for you, Bernie? Because you are really level-headed. I mean, some people have asked me about being a session musician. I know we were talking about your podcasting, but what do you think it takes to do that kind of job for these great artists that you've worked with? What do you think it takes from like a professional? Just keeping your mouth zipped? I'm just joking.
One other thing about that gig I remember is I was setting up for rehearsal. You were the first person to come and introduce yourself to me.
Okay. Yeah, well,
I don't know if you remember that.
wow, yeah, as I said, I'm ever nosy, as it turns out. No, it was lovely to meet
I'm gonna go find out.
That was lovely to see you. So so you've done that, but you didn't come. That's quite unusual actually, because normally when I speak to bass techs or people that text with instruments, they normally have played it in some way, shape or form. But you said you
Yeah.
don't play the guitar or the bass, right? Or did you
No,
say you?
no, I do play, but not anymore. I haven't played
Oh,
professionally
okay.
yet, but I do play. I just tend to keep that to myself. I'm not one of those techs who goes up there and wants to show off what I can do. I'm there for one reason and one reason only, to make sure that the person I'm looking after has a great show.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And in that sense, we're not dissimilar. You're working behind the scenes and the setting up, but I'm the same as when you're in a supporting role, supporting the main artist. That's precisely why you are there. And the problems can arise really when you start thinking you're something else.
Yeah.
Which, I'd love to say it's not. No, I think I'm pretty good like that. But that professionalism it might not be in there 100%, but that people fall by the wayside when they forget it really too often, right?
Yeah, I do believe that. I've seen it happen, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the one before you started the Duran and the podcast? Because you've mentioned the two, the country and western and
Oh, I worked for an
country rock.
artist in Josh Ritter, who's like acoustic based Americana.
Right. Just
Only,
gonna pause.
yeah.
Who did you say that was?
Josh Ritter.
Right.
And for years I worked with him and Duran both. Like if he was touring, Duran wasn't, and if Duran was touring, he wasn't. So it always worked out. Probably for the
How
first,
come it always works out? It
yeah,
does
that worked.
often, doesn't it?
Yeah, it worked out for the first probably 2 years. But I didn't know in 2011 when I started on this gig that I would be here in 2022. I didn't. Uh, I really thought at the time our production manager said we just need you through the end of April. Who was Richard Young, you know.
Right. Yes, I remember him. Yeah.
He said we just need you through the end of April, and then he left. He left halfway through, and we got a new
You sound
production
really
manager.
affronted.
And then I like
He
to make
left you here with us.
yeah.
With us
I like,
bunch of nutters.
I know. I like to make the joke that he left and I never told the new guy that I was supposed to go home. So,
So you got to stay. So back to the
so here I
podcast.
am.
Yeah, and you've been doing that ever since. So with the podcast, so yeah, tell us more about. You said you like the way that the story unfolds, and then what's your favorite kind of questions? Do you have any questions that you tend to ask most times?
I think I try to not do this, but I always ask like, how did you get started? Because I think it's a very important question. Some people find it very boring, but I find it very important because some people are doing what they do out of necessity. Some people started doing what they do by pure accident. And if you can find that out, I think that starts the conversation.
Yeah. And so you said for you it was by
I,
did you say it was by pure accident? Doing your what's happened?
uh,
No, well, what you do, not the podcast, because you said you really wanted to do that. The bass tech was by pure accident though, right?
it was a pleasant accident. I knew that people toured and were techs and roadies and whatnot, but I was a single dad, and I didn't know that I could do it. And luckily for me, my first gig was with a country artist who they only tour on weekends. They only do
Oh God,
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
that's so handy. So were you, when you say you
So
were a single dad, were you bringing up your, I don't think I've met your child. How old are they now? Adult probably.
well, I have one son, and he's 25 now.
What's his
So
name?
his name's Gavin.
Okay. And so when you say you're single dad, did you bring him up then?
Since he was 7, he's
Oh.
been living with me. So yeah. So
Oh.
it was to me, it worked out perfectly those first several years of his life when I worked for country artists. Because like I said, I was home most of the time and just gone on weekends, and you know, and then we moved on to real touring.
Yeah, when did you say Gavin?
Gavin, yeah.
Yeah, when he got a little bit older. How was that for you? I suppose it's going back a few years now. Just juggling the routine, as you said, being away at weekends helped, but really, how did it feel for you? It must have been quite a particular circumstance because, well, people talk about single parents without wanting to be sexist. You may have heard it before, but you get that that assumption that when people are single parents, there's still that assumption that it's single mums, isn't it? Right? Whereas
Yeah.
it is a sexist assumption because increasingly, and it can just as much be single. It theoretically could just as much be single dads. How did you find that? How did you find juggling that?
Uh, well, I think I sometimes think I'm still juggling it. You know, we just made it work. We just made it work. I always tell people my son grew up faster than he grew up quick, and he grew up very responsible. You know, I'd like to think that I instilled some things in him, but it was just we made it work, and he understood the circumstance once I started doing it, and we had an understanding.
Yeah, so you were kind of an unstoppable team together. He understood your situation that you needed to get out there and yeah, bring the income in, right?
Yeah, and that's a good word, unstoppable. Thank you. I've never used that term, but I think it was. We together we knew that we had to make it work. Um, Not to get personal, but I think together we knew that there were people standing on the sidelines waiting for us to fail.
Oh, seriously?
And we didn't, and we made it through. And he's a great kid. He's a great young man, and I
And
couldn't
so
ask for better.
he looks at what you're doing now, and does he think, "Oh yeah, I fancy doing that as well," or do you think there's no son of mine's going to do this job?
I
It's
think a
crazy.
little bit, a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I always tell him, like, if you want to get into it, I can help you. And he's like, "Nah, I'm good."
I've seen what it did to. I'm only joking. No. So he's so what is he into? What does he do?
He has a regular job. He works for the company Aldi, which I think is they're based I think in Germany, but they have them in the UK. But we have some
Yeah.
some places there in Texas, back where he lives. But he really wants to get in. He's a creative kid. He just can't grasp that idea of what he wants to create. It's balling up inside him, and I think he'll find his way into that world. That's why I'm always saying you should come out here, and you'll find it.
All right, because you think he'd be into basically the world that you're in.
I think he would find his way through something out here. Maybe not in the world that I'm in, but maybe in another aspect of it.
Of the creative thing. So have you
Yeah,
ever thought of interviewing him, or is that like too close?
I think it's too close. He might tell some secrets that I don't want everyone to know.
Does that like, do you find that happens when you're interviewing in the podcasts? You said that like the best thing is when people kind of unravel, they just feel really comfortable. So they really just say what they feel like saying and it doesn't feel censored. So, but do you find that that people do? They say secrets and then they well either regret them or I don't know, or they just kind of go with it, right?
I think if they say anything that they want, they'll usually ask me, "Can you take that out?" And I will. I've never would disrespect anybody and lose their trust. But most of the time, their stories they don't get too deep into it. They don't get too deep into what They tell me what makes them tick, but they don't get very private. Which if they wanted to, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I'm just wondering if I can share the screen so people can just have a quick look. I mean, it might be thinking just be far too ambitious, seeing as the internet seems to go on and off every 2 seconds. But let's just quickly see if I can share it so that people in the interview can see. All right, here. Yeah, I did share it. Let's just move that up a little bit. Yeah, so Kevin was the last one, right? So this is it. Is breakfast include for anyone wanting to find it? And it's on all of them, right?
It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you can stream podcasts, it's available.
Right. So you've got Kevin's, and who are these? Yeah. So these are all different friends. You said like people, some of them have been ambitious requests that you kind of thought, I'd love to interview you. You made it happen. And
Yeah.
did you just like reach out to them? Did you just how did you approach
I
people?
just,
Like,
I just reach out,
right.
you
You
know.
just go for it.
Yeah, there was one guest who was connected me through a friend. Her name was Mackenzie Phillips, and she's an actress who was on a show when I was a kid and has been in several shows. Most recently, Orange is the New Black. She was on
Oh, she
season
was.
6. And
That was brilliant, that series, right?
yes, and she's been very open about her struggles with addiction and her life, and she agreed to do it, and it was a great conversation. And you know, that's when
That's
it really
fantastic.
that's when it
Yeah.
really it counts to us, when we reach out to somebody and they say yes, and it's somebody we respect or we
Yeah, and that you look
admire.
up to. Have you ever been like tempted by that? Because people always assume if you're on the
Then I
road, as I
just
said, I learned that really, well, I wouldn't say immediately, if I'm totally honest, but I've learned from when I was young that the best way to stay on the road is to be as professional as possible. And have you ever had, because those are kind of, it does crop up that kind of stuff, doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Have you managed to kind of just steer clear of all that? You never struck me as somebody that's like well, I wouldn't put it like that. That's kind of out of balance or out of kilter.
Well, thank you.
And maybe that's just because I see you just before we go on stage. Although I do remember the one time when you did give me your opinion on Trump in a very kind of well balanced. It was a very kind of understated delivery, but it was a very uncompromising view. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, I think we had a little too much time on our hands that day. He caught me on a
Well,
good.
there's also the I don't know what was happening, but it was at a particularly I don't know, there was something that he'd recently sanctioned that was like, as far as you were concerned, it was like, that's just too far.
Yeah.
I'm going to make some plans. We won't necessarily go into what those plans were that you suggested, but you definitely were thinking, I'm going to make some plans. I was like, all right, Bernie, okay. So that's like that well-balanced view I have of you. There's things that, fair enough, that you are very passionate about, and arguably rightly so in that particular instance. But I'm just looking at some of these podcasts. So who is Fred Burke? Who's it? Okay, what it says, backline technician. So you've interviewed quite a lot of friends as well, right?
Yeah, that's mainly, I try and interview people who do what we do, or like I approached you, I want to interview you.
Oh yeah, I look
People,
forward to that.
people who just like cross paths with. I think back in September I crossed paths with a guy who makes jewelry out of guitar strings, and I just said, hey, do you want to do my podcast? And he said, yeah, I'll do it, you know. And
Yeah,
I had never met him. It seemed that was interesting to me.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's very much in keeping with the actual podcast. But I do get like an element of privacy with you. Just from I still think you've been open, but I do get a kind of element when you're talking about your family life, which is understandable. You've kind of been open about it, but also, I don't know, I'm just kind of, yeah, when you say you make something happen. So would you say that you're kind of quite reserved still with certain elements of just in the habit of being quite reserved? Because it's slightly contrary if you think about it to everything that we do as interviewers.
I think publicly I am quite reserved. If you know, amongst friends, I'll talk about my life, my family. But I think publicly, I'm nobody. I'm a bass tech. But I
Don't
think
say that.
what I'm saying is, we're still in the public eye. We're still in the presence of, and you don't, you know, people. I'm not saying all of them, but they'll find out things about you, and they'll pry into it, you know, and just because who you work for or what you do for a
Oh, I
living.
see what you mean. Yeah.
So I just tend to keep that part of my life very private. You know, I've always talked about my son. I've always been proud that, you know, that I'm a single father. But
Yes.
you know, I really don't go too deep into my, you know, you know. There was a
Well,
time.
well, I don't know, Bernie, but that's
Well,
totally.
there was a time when I was getting like mail at my house asking for things, and these were people I didn't know, but they found my information
Oh,
online.
right, I see. Yes, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, you have to maintain a kind of professional privacy in that respect, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
especially.
early on,
Oh, wait a minute, I'm just going to put it on pause. Right, you've come back again. You come back again, and yeah, we have made it work.
okay.
I feel like I know a little bit more about you, but I love that you kind of, I love, I don't think it's dissimilar to what I was saying. You've got like that kind of balanced exterior, and I love that you're so
Uh,
interested in other people, which is why I'm sure your podcast is highly worth listening to. And it sounds like you really love it. I mean, we didn't talk so much. You did say that you send, in terms of like the nuts and bolts of how to do it, you send everything to your friend, right? And she does all that side of things.
yes, Lisa. She does all the, she, like I said, she does the presentation, the social media. She will listen to the interview and give me feedback on maybe you should do this, maybe you should put a little more enthusiasm into the intros. And she's very it's really good having that um a partner that'll tell you, that'll be honest with you about it, and not just have
Yeah.
somebody go, oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Because had
Right.
I been doing this for the last year and a half, I wouldn't have had, I think we have 67, we've done an episode a week every
Fabulous.
week. After that first episode, we were like, okay, now we have to put out another one.
Yeah.
And we just
Um,
kept going.
You get great. And what would you advise? Because I know there'll be plenty of people, and it's very much. I mean, I know it's on Vogue. So it's not for everyone. They are popular, and I love that you said there's that genuine interest, and that's why I've kept the interviews going, because I just genuinely very curious to know what people are about and what they're actually, what the nuts and bolts of how they do what they're doing, how it happens. Which is why I was asking about the bass playing, and I know that you've said that you send this to your friend that does all of that. But what would you advise to people? I think you mentioned it in the taster a little bit, that are interested in doing a podcast. What do you need to know? What would you really say? Put this in place, and what you need to think about, whether the practicalities, but also from an interview point of view.
I would think find a topic you like to do. If you want to do a podcast on cooking, if you're passionate about cooking, do that. It, I wouldn't try and do something that's out of, to always stay in your lane. I chose to do what I do, mainly production people in live industry, because I mean, everyone wants to be in live music. Everyone is curious about what goes on out here. Everyone is curious about the entertainment industry. And that's why I chose to do it. I'm doing it on a very small scale, but that's why I keep doing this. I love doing it. I love talking to people. I love the like the deadline. We have to have it done by this day. It has to be out on Friday. And even though it scares me every week, and when we release it every week, I cringe. I'm thinking, oh, everyone's laughing at you, but you know.
Well, I'm sure they're not. I mean, even if they are, keep doing it. That's what I say. Because I'm sure, well, some people will be used to me by now, because there's all sorts of, like the lighting will be a certain way, or, and this is kind of, I think everything's happened in this particular interview. They've seen everyone, all the parts of my bedroom that I was thinking, oh, I don't know if I want people to see the parts of this hotel room, because I've been trying to get a decent internet connection. The only bit they haven't seen is the toilet. So maybe we should go in there and we'll get a brilliant internet connection.
The Wi-Fi signal's perfect in there.
Oh, now let's go. I'm sitting on the bathroom. Let's do it. Yeah. But I would say, so you'd say, choose a subject you're interested in. And in terms of the nuts and bolts, what would you say? When people want to get started, I mean, what is it that your friend, I suppose you could say delegate. That's a great advert for delegating, isn't it? Know what you do best and delegate the rest, kind of thing.
And yeah, and if you're getting started, don't spend a lot of money. Like do your research. I didn't do my research, and I just bought gear. But
Right.
podcasts can be done from your phone. They can be done
Can
from your
they?
computer. Yeah, you can do anything. But I chose a route that works for me, and it maybe I go a little bit extra mile with it, but it works for me, and it's simple for me. but I'm not as technically what's the word I'm not very good technically. So, but I've seen people do podcasts with nothing but a phone.
When you say nothing but a phone, why? What, recording just on voice memo?
Yeah, they'll record it. They make mics that plug into your phone that pick up dynamics. They pick up the room, and they just put their phone with the mic connected in there, and they'll record the interview. Yeah.
All
So
right.
they make podcasting is such a big thing now that they make mics for any kind of podcast you want to do.
Right. Okay. So don't feel you got to go and spend tons of cash.
Yes. Don't
Yeah,
spend
and
tons of
focus
time.
on quality, like you said. Again, all of the people that you just really fancy chatting to, and you've done a lot of people in the industry, like behind the scenes in the industry. So that's a kind of, but it's not just the music industry, like you said. You interviewed did you say was it a boxer or not a boxer, but
Yeah, a professional boxer. She was the first female boxer on the cover of Sports, first and only, should I say, female boxer on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She was the WBC champion. She was undefeated.
fantastic.
Yes, and I just reached out to her, and she said, yeah, she was somebody that I admired when I was young. And most recently, also a few months ago, I interviewed a girl named Monica Aldama from the Netflix show Cheer.
Did you? How did you get that? You just just emailed them?
Well, no. Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This show Cheer on Netflix is based on a cheer team in Corsicana, Texas, which is where I grew up. And the coach is a childhood friend of mine.
Oh, I see. So that's
And
how you got that. So
yeah,
use your friends, use your contacts.
yeah,
That's
don't be afraid
another.
to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. If your friends are real friends and they are somewhat successful, they want to see you succeed. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
And sod the rest, because they were never friends anyway if they didn't want to see you succeed.
yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
more people watching you, see if you're gonna fail.
Well, hopefully that's not, no, I think it's a brilliant, well, just from what I can see of it, I might even watch them tonight because you've mentioned it a few times. So Kevin, who I think is fabulous, and he's the drum tech on Duran. But there's so many here as I'm scrolling down, and this is on iTunes podcast. So everybody go check out Is Breakfast Included? I feel like I know a little bit more about you, but I still think it's quite a skillful art to be open and reserved at the same time. And I think you've managed that beautifully in this interview, but partly because there's been quite a lot of stops and starts. So maybe that's partly why. But anyway, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And thank you so much. And all the best. And I will see you at the Duran Show.
And make sure they subscribe and leave a review.
Oh, okay. All right. Not always the unassuming then. I'm only joking. Yeah, subscribe
Right.
and leave a
Good night.
review. Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Because does that build the ratings up, kind of thing?
In this world we live in, Anna, it's all about the numbers.
Yeah.
You can have the best product, but if you don't have anybody listening or anybody present, that's what everyone looks at, is your numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Subscribe and leave a review, starting with me. That's me. I need to get my act together there. But thank you so very much, Bernie. And take care. And I'll see you very
Thanks
soon.
for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.